There we go. It worked. That actually did work. So,
Magic.
a while ago, you guys talked about how to write cultural differences in writing in a like respectful and like accurate sort of way. So if you have any specific questions that you had, because you guys were the ones who brought it up, please like write them down so that way you can remember to ask me. Um, or just ask when the relevant topic comes up. But anyway, point being, I really want to know your specific questions, but I did my best based on the generalized topic.
So is today Q&A day?
No. So, we're talking about cultural differences in modern day. That's the topic.
I didn't know that.
Yep, your brain went, nope, and then started listening. So, to recap,
Okay.
that is what we're talking about. So you can ask any questions under that umbrella topic, was my point, which is why it got confusing.
I do have
All right.
a question of what you mean by modern, as in like modern day or modern as in
Within the last 25
So
years.
not the Ottoman Empire.
Well, it's just that cultural differences are drastically different in medieval times versus the 1900s
I just
versus
wasn't sure what you meant by
yeah.
modern, like 50 years back or 5 years back. I wasn't sure what you meant. By
anything since 2000 is generally considered
Ed Sheeran
within
and Michael
modern
Jackson.
times. So, moving forward. First, I want to address the fact that culture is more than just where you came from, or who your parents are, or what your skin color is, or any of that. Culture is something that we develop as a society. And so you can have a cultural background, for instance, of being Guatemalan or something like that. But if you grow up in America, you're going to have an entirely different cultural perspective than if you grew up in Guatemala with Guatemalan parents. So keep in mind, culture is part of what society makes it and what you are raised in. It's not just who you are related to. And when I say who you're raised by, it even changes depending on your own personal culture. When I say that, I mean things like, are you a fantasy nerd? That is a pop culture thing. Are you a sports nerd? That is a different culture thing. Are you a big fan of card games and board games? That's a totally different subsection of culture as well. And then, heck, even how you were raised can be affecting your own miniature culture. Were you raised by a single mom? Were you raised by divorced parents? Were you raised to like be in two different countries at once because your parents like immigrated here? Like that can all drastically change your own personal cultural reference point. Someone who had, for example, let's go to with the Guatemalan thing. Let's say someone their parents are from Guatemala and they immigrated here. And so them growing up here is going to be entirely different than someone who has Guatemalan parents who were born here. Like, who were, their parents were Guatemalan. And so they're not technically Guatemalan, they're Guatemalan American or something like that. That's going to be entirely different and they're not going to be exactly the same. Speaking of which, what friend circles you run in is its own minor culture. If you run with the goth crowd, you're going to have a little mini culture there. If you run with the cheerleading crowd, that's its own mini societal culture there. Like every single crowd is its own mini culture. Even if you don't run with a specific crowd and you're just like, sup, I just make whatever random friends I make, that's also its own form of oddball mischief culture. Yeah, eclectic culture. Exactly. Perfect word for it. Thank you. So, with that being said, even who you identify as can help with that kind of cultural referencing. So, culture is a very broad spectrum, so I'm going to narrow it down a little bit to what I'm going to be talking about today, but keep in mind, big topic. I can't cover it all. So if you have specific questions, that's okay. All right. So first, you need to look at what cultural things have adapted from other cultures, or even what things have gone from being unacceptable to acceptable, or vice versa. For example, back before modern times, there were a lot of people who were like, women in the workplace, gross. And that was considered unacceptable. Exactly. Women voting? Weird.
Outside the house? How dare they?
Exactly. Pants. gasp, that was considered culturally unacceptable. That's why it's important to look at
Not
modern
okay.
day culture if you're doing something that takes place in the contemporary society, because there's a lot of differences. And so, yes, there can be misogynists who are still like women shouldn't be working. But there's very, very few of those in comparison to back in the 1800s.
Everybody.
So if you were to compare us and do like a side by side comparison, one would be like everyone agrees with that, and the other one would be like maybe 2%. So, with that being said, it's important not to blow out of proportion different things that aren't actually as accurate just for the sake of plot. Can you have them run into people like that? Sure, because people like that exist, but don't make it seem like everyone feels that way when it's an outdated cultural reference. All right, the other thing that's important to take into account is even just different cultural ethics, which sounds weird, but all cultures have different ethical values. Some people believe it's perfectly okay if someone doesn't believe in your religion to murder them.
Oh yeah, I know about that.
Yeah, it's considered just like you're actually a saving grace. You're like being a good person by murdering someone if they don't believe in your religion and don't convert. It's seen as good thing. It is concerning, but that's concerning because we don't believe in it. If we grew up in that culture, we might actually think it was fine. Cultural ethics are incredibly complicated and confusing, so you got to make sure, and potentially problematic,
Like
just in general.
Stalin, Russia.
Yes, there are all sorts of different things that
I read
if
a
you
book
went to
about
Russia
that.
might be totally fine, but if you did it here, you'd get arrested. And or vice versa. There are things that you could do in Russia that you'd be like, this is fine in America, and you'd be thrown in the freaking gulag. Like,
Like
Really
this
good.
kid accidentally broke the nose off of this
Yeah.
Stalin statue, and he was like hiding because he was like, I'm going to get arrested, and they're gonna kill me.
Yeah, no, literally. And yet, even in today's society, it'd be like, whoops, kid messed up. Like, it's important to remember where you're writing as well. If you are writing from a different country, make sure that you take that into account. Or even if you're writing someone who came from a different country and then is in the USA because you're familiar with that, make sure that you know the cultural norms of that society and that you know what's going on. Make sure that also you do a because yes, reading a lot of books that take place from that time and reading a lot of various things like that and watching movies from that time can be helpful, but sometimes they can screw up too. So it's important to do your in-depth research about cultural norms and taboos. And that's another thing that we're going to talk about is just even things that are considered taboo. For example, there are some places in Africa where if you steal something, in order to prove your innocence, you have to be willing to like walk over hot coals. And if you're willing to, it proves you're innocent, whether or not you are. And yet in our culture, we'd be like, whoa, what? That's insane. What? That's not any form of justice.
Trial?
Because that's to us, that's not what a trial looks like. But to them, that's incredibly sacred and important and exactly what a trial looks like. And so it's important to take into mind these type of weird cultural differences. And take into account food differences too. I know this may sound weird, but literally, fried chicken. That's an example of a cultural difference. And hamburgers, yes. But even so with fried chicken, originally it was a food that Scottish people were like, ugh, this is so gross. We're just gonna give it to the slaves because we like don't care about it. And the slaves were like, dude, it's only gross because you didn't add spices. And so they added a bunch of spices and now it's delicious. And so like a lot of those types of things can just evolve out of various cultures interacting each other either in horrible ways like slavery or in good positive ways and being like, hey, your recipe, my recipe, let's mix them. So and take these kinds of things into account. Don't just assume certain things come from certain cultures. Do your research, deep dive, look at things from a new perspective. Don't just assume what you've been told is correct. A lot of things we get told or learn aren't necessarily correct. They might be a little off or misinformed.
I'm pretty sure a French horn isn't from France.
Exactly, or different things like that. Exactly.
There's
Thank
also
you.
something
Great
called
example.
English horn, and they're completely different instruments.
Yes, it's important to take those kinds of things into account if you're writing a different culture in a different country, and then even just different taboos. For example, in our culture, it's generally considered like nope if you eat or drink blood, right? And yet there are some places where it's not only considered sacred, but it's
Like goat's
considered
blood.
like very healthy. Yeah. Or even just in England, they do blood sausage, right? Here,
What is blood
not a
sausage?
thing. But over there, absolutely. They literally just make curdled blood sausage and they're like, this is a part of breakfast. This is our classic English breakfast.
I thought England was bad at cooking.
No. They're actually pretty good at cooking. They just got really heckin' creative when their king decided to make it so they had less money during the medieval ages, and a lot of things came out of that, including blood sausage cheap. And so they were like, how can we make it? The butcher, literally, the butcher would just have all this leftover blood, and they'd be like, can I have that for like
Does he just collect
two
the blood
pennies?
after he's
Yeah.
done? He's like, somebody put that all in a bag.
There you go.
Pretty much. That's pretty much what happened is he would drain it all into a bucket and then they'd be like, can I have that bucket for like a penny? And they
Oh
were
my
like, dude, yes. So like
No.
all these kinds of things that become perfectly normal in today's culture back then were just like innovative stuff
Like,
that we did
whoa.
to get by.
Blood in a bucket.
What if we made that into a sausage? Genius. And so it's important that you look at those kind of things so that way you aren't having someone be like, ooh, squeamish, gross blood. And when in reality, if like they were English, they'd be like, heck yeah, blood sausage. So you gotta make sure you know these kinds of things. You might think it's gross. That doesn't mean they will. All right. Next thing.
Oh, snails. My mom went somewhere and they were
That's
selling
true.
snails.
Exactly.
And I was like, so,
Yep. And once again, that was something they created during the French Depression because they had snails everywhere. And so they were like, sweet, free meat.
Oh my gosh.
And now it's considered like high tier.
They're
That's
literally
Escargot.
just slugs in a shell.
Yes. And so, yes, exactly. Lobsters,
They
yes.
were like the fisherman food, and now they're like delicate.
They were considered like gross. The fishermen had to eat this, and now it's literally like so expensive you can't afford it because it's considered a delicacy. It's like exactly. It's crazy. But point being is that you got to make sure you look into these kinds of things. Look into what kinds of dishes they would eat. Look into their culture. Look into how they would even act in that culture, and if that would be considered taboo. I just watched a movie the other day that was a Bollywood film.
A Bollywood film.
And it was quite enlightening, actually, because yes, I knew a lot about India, but it was fascinating to see how this girl trying to stand up against patriarchal norms, which are much more enforced in India. And it felt like the 1950s, and yet everything was modern. And I was like, whoa, this is insane. This girl just wants to have a career, and they're being like, no, shut up, sit down. The only way you're going to have a career is being a doctor. And if you're not a doctor, shut up. Like, get married, shut up. Like, it's insane. And yet it's something that they believe because that's their culture. And so I'm not trying to be offensive by saying it's insane, but I just mean to us it feels insane because that's not how we were raised.
Wow.
Moving forward, with that stuff. All right, how do we discuss things like this in a very like gentle and sensitive way? Because there are some things that you might research and be like, dude, that literally sounds insane. Because in your opinion, it is.
Find people who are from there.
Yes, that is actually the first thing that I have on my list. If you can find people who are actually from there or have that experience, do. Absolutely have at least one or two beta readers who are, for example, if your character has a single mom as a parent, a very supportive single mom, find at least two beta readers with supportive single moms, and that came from that background. If you have someone who is originally an immigrant, find someone who has parents who immigrated to the US. If you have someone who is Native American and especially a specific tribe, see if you can find someone from that specific tribe to read your stuff. See what you can do to connect with that culture. Also, research and reading biographies from those point of views. If you can find a biography with someone from that point of view, absolutely do it. Read as many biographies as you can because that'll help give you that understanding that the beta readers can also give, but from a second-hand account, so you don't have to quite do as much work. Next, avoid cultural stereotypes. Yes, there are some things like with India being incredibly kind of misogynistic and being like, look, if you aren't like a doctor or a lawyer, you're not worth as a woman.
I don't think men and women are allowed to shake hands.
Yeah, exactly. And like men and women aren't allowed to shake hands. And when it comes to like getting married and things like that, it's pretty much entirely on the bride's family and different things like that. And so it's important to keep these things in mind.
Like a wedding
Yeah.
dowry.
Yeah, exactly. Like a dowry and all those kinds of things. And it's just, it's kind of things that you might not understand, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be including it. But the way it becomes a stereotype, the way it becomes a problem is if you start just making everyone a carbon copy of each other in your story. That's when it starts to become a stereotype rather than an actual like person. You can have a person who falls into a stereotype, but if everyone in that group is falling into a stereotype, that's a problem. That's not actually going to be beneficial to you or your writing or your readers. Yes, question or comment, whatever it is, say it.
Oh yeah, there's a character in a book I'm reading who does fall into the typical like scared nerd category, but the rest of them are pretty good about not being the stereotype.
Yeah.
It's like there's like the one of them is like a pink loving girl, and but she's like not timid or anything. Like she's brave. She's probably the bravest out of all of them.
So she's not your classic cheerleader. I love pink. Oh no, I'm scared type.
Yeah, there's another one of those characters, but she's not a main one, so it's fine.
But
I
see,
just ignore her.
it's okay to have some stereotypes because stereotypes are stereotypes for a reason. There is a majority of people who fall under that category. Yes. But you shouldn't do harmful stereotypes. If they harm or are disrespectful in any way, that's not good. But if you do something just like out of all these nerds, one nerd is a scared nerd. Of course,
well,
that's gonna happen.
They all love
that's
playing
my point.
card games and stuff. But one of them is like the classic Coke bottle.
Exactly, and that's okay to have one token character who fits the stereotype, but just don't have all of them fit that stereotype. That's when you start running into problems, when you literally just start doing cut paste, cut paste, cut paste of all your characters. Just, hi, I'm exactly the same as the one next to me, but my name is Dan and his name is Chan, and like you just start making up stuff. That's when it becomes a problematic stereotype, when everybody feels like a carbon copy paste.
Like all of the guys in the football team. Like this one is a big jock, and this one is a big jock, and they're all big jocks.
Yeah, see, in some ways it's okay when you're doing things like a sports team because that does tend to happen. But even on a sports team, you might have one of them who really loves baking and secretly doesn't want to tell anyone. Yes. You might have someone who is secretly a nerd but also doesn't want to tell anyone. Or you might have someone who's like, literally, I love Dungeons and Dragons, and if any of you make fun of me, I'm going to punch you in the face. Like, you never know. Yes.
There's in another book, it's a comic, he's a hockey player, and he's on a hockey team with a bunch of these like big muscular guys, and he's just kind of this tiny little twig, and he also loves baking, but he's like a really good hockey player.
Yeah, exactly. You can be a good hockey player and not just be like an absolutely massive bear of a man.
All of them are different too. Some of them are the classic like knucklehead, know nothing kind of big muscular guys, but some of them are like actually like they really care for each other. And
exactly.
Like, let me set you up with this girlfriend.
See, that's the thing. You got to make sure that if you do have a overarching theme for your characters, that they're not all just carbon copies, because that's when you're falling into stereotype problems. All right, last tip that I'm going to give for the day before you can ask any questions that you want regarding cultural differences. Avoid making their culture their whole personality. Is it important to your personality to have your cultural background? 100%. Do some people make their culture their whole personality? Yes, but not everyone does. And so it's important to not just have every single character of yours have their culture be their personality. Maybe one have their culture be their personality, sure. But you don't have to have every single one be like, I'm Mexican, I'm African American, I'm this, I'm that. It's like, no, that's not a character, that's just a culture embodied in a person. You got to make sure that it's a part of who they are, not literally who they are. Yes, question.
Another one. I read a lot of books with like
that's okay.
Groups of people
Diversity is good.
But one of them is from like Washington or something.
Yeah.
The other one's from Florida.
Yeah.
And the other one is from Italy.
Yeah.
And the Florida guy, I mean, he likes surfing, but he also like plays piano and stuff.
Yeah.
But he kind of is similar to the stereotypical Floridan accent, but he does get scared of things a lot. And then the Italian girl, she definitely makes Italy her entire personality. She's like, my family makes the best pasta.
And that's okay.
Peasants.
Exactly. And it's okay because there are some people who do make it their personality, and that's okay. But you got to make sure that you're not making your whole cast just everyone is their personality. If it's
Yeah.
one person, two people even, sure, but you got to make sure that the rest of your cast, their culture is their background, not their whole entire reason for existence.
Yeah.
But yes, some people do that. I actually
you
have
said
a lot of people who I follow who do various like cooking channels and things like that, and a lot of them are like, in Italy we do it this way, and I'm like, cool. You don't have to tell me it's Italian. Just tell me how to do it. So moving forward, what are your guys' questions regarding writing cultural differences and how to do it well? Yes, question.
So like, do you know like ways to like not seem like racist if you're like, oh, this person's African American?
Ah, so that you're not just bluntly being like, this is their race. Yeah. I would say this is when show don't tell comes absolutely and utterly into crucial sync. However, you got to keep in mind that it does feel a little racist if you use food descriptors. So, for example, for a white person, you wouldn't say their skin is white as milk. And if you do, that sounds weird.
It sounds like they were dipped in white.
Exactly. It's like, why? And so a lot of times people, when they're doing African Americans or Latinos or different things like that, they will say things like their skin is the color of chocolate. And it's like, that just sounds gross and weird.
Wrong.
Exactly. It sounds wrong. And so that can come off racist. So in general, I would say if you're going to do descriptors, use nature-based descriptors. That sounds strong and empowering to be like their skin is the color of mahogany. That's like, ooh, that's cool. That's awesome.
I actually could do that in one of mine.
Yeah, and so it sounds very much more empowering and cool rather than saying something like chocolate and it's like delicious. Weird. Also,
I can never unhear that.
also for also for not being racist, I would say don't focus a ton on um, stereotyped racial features. So, for example, don't focus a ton on accents. Even if they do have an accent, just say they have a Floridian accent. Don't try to mimic it. That's actually going to make it more problematic and potentially offensive. Um, and so I wouldn't necessarily even try an accent. I would just say, this is their accent. Let's move on.
Oh yeah,
um,
like the Italian girl. They just
Yeah,
say
exactly.
that she has an
Italian
Italian
accent.
accent, and then she just
Move on.
has an
Trying
Italian.
sometimes trying to do that actually is more offensive than if you did it correctly. It's sticky water, sticky territory. You can try, but no, it's sticky.
What about a southern accent?
Um,
A southern.
If it's American, it's less considered racially stereotyping because of the fact that we're such a melting pot of cultures.
Yeah.
And so as a result, we aren't like all black or all white or all brown. And so as a result, it feels less racially stereotyping than if you like
That was in the same book with like
make
all three of them.
all people, yeah.
And like the
Yeah.
Florida guy and stuff, and they didn't mimic any other accent except for that one guy with the southern accent.
Yeah, and so like in some ways when it's doing things like southern accents or things like that, that's more okay because we're such a melting pot. But if you're doing something like trying to mimic a very heavy Mexican accent, you could come off racist. You come off racist if you try it? Yes. May you also not come off racist if you try it? Also, yes. That's why I was like, it's not a yes or a no. It's just no, it's sticky. No, it's hard. No, it's potentially offensive. It's muddy waters. And then with facial features, be careful of those kinds of things. Just because unless the person's romantically attracted to them, they are probably not going to be describing their facial features. That's weird. Um, so if you're being like, yes, they have beautiful, luscious lips, it's like, are they gonna kiss them? Like, what is going on?
Beautiful, luscious.
And then beyond that, you can also run into the sticky territory of having racially describing features that can be problematic, and people might get offended. So, in general, I would say go for skin color and go for maybe hair texture and color. But I wouldn't go much farther than that unless it's like a really important trait. Let's say that someone's really self-conscious about how big their nose is or something like that. Then you can mention something like that, but typically have them mention it. Don't have another character mention it because that can also become problematic. Yes, question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How would you differentiate? This is kind of like a really specific one.
That's
How do
okay.
you differentiate between like regular like braided hair with like the 3 strands and
Uh-huh.
like the hairstyle braided hair?
There are
box
actually very, yeah, I was gonna say there's actually very
Oh,
specific terms.
cornrows. That's what they're called.
Cornrows, and there's cornrows, there's box braids, there's dreadlocks, there's all sorts of different varieties.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I would just Google the style that
Oh,
you're
yeah,
looking
just
for
Google it.
and then find the exact name.
Okay.
That way it's less confusing for your readers, and on top of that, if you use the exact name, that's cool.
Yeah.
So bonus points.
Yay.
Any other questions about writing culturally different from you characters? No? Okay. Awesome.
Wait.
Yes, question.
What if the only people I know from that culture are very stereotypical?
Try to find some other people.
Okay.
No offense to them, you're welcome to use them, but at the same time, I would say definitely broaden your horizons.
Okay.
And that's why I say be careful of TV shows and things like that, because for example, if you're writing a book that is supposed to be like a K-drama, and that's okay because you're being stereotypical on purpose because K-dramas.
Yes,
Um,
K-dramas.
But if you're literally just writing a book that takes place in Korea and not trying to be a K-drama, you might want to talk to some actual Koreans.
Well, I know a girl from
So,
China, and sometimes
yeah.
she'll just like look like we'll be in a crowd, and she'll be like, not to be racist, but all of you guys look the same. And I'm like,
That's amazing.
okay.
All right. But yes.
We not all look the same.
Oh man, that's funny. All right. But yes, speaking of which, that is something that people need to work on. A lot of people are just like they're African American, and it's like, okay, that doesn't help me. Do they wear their hair in an afro? Do they wear their hair in cornrows? Do they have a thinner face? Are they super muscular? Are they super tall? Like just telling me their race isn't going to tell me anything else about them. And so a lot of people struggle with those where they're just like, they are Korean, yay. And it's like, okay,
Revolutionary.
not helpful. All Koreans look different. They do. Whether or not you feel that way or whether or not you have trouble being able to tell one Korean from another Korean, watch more shows with that kind of diversity in it so you can learn, hey, these are all different kinds of Korean facial features, and this is how diverse their culture is. That way you can describe them better when you have a character of that ethnicity. As far as finding people who are more than just your regular friends, there are Facebook beta reading groups. Make sure that you have a bunch of like reviews and things like that. Make sure that they are actually well tested and that you aren't going to just be sending it off into the void. But there are actually professional beta reading groups on Facebook, and they're for different genres too. So you can go to a fantasy one if you're fantasy. You can go to a contemporary romance one if you're contemporary romance. You can do a murder mystery one if you're doing murder mystery. Whatever you're doing, you can find a Facebook beta reading group for that, and you can even say, "Hey, I specifically want to know from have beta readers who are African American, or I have beta readers who have a single mom, or different things like that," and say, "I want this kind of opinion. So if you have this background, for sure read my book, please." And that can be incredibly helpful. We have social media nowadays, so take advantage of it. Use it. It is a good tool. Yes, it is a scary tool. I get that. But as long as you do your research and make sure that they are a safe platform, I would say 100% use it. Yes.
Also, I looked this up.
Mhm.
Don't like some publishers won't want to publish you if you publish your thing on like a fan fiction site.
Yes.
Before that, it's
Yes.
like I think it's like the something right of like being the first to publish it.
Yeah.
Some will, but some won't.
So the main thing is that
good
if you
advice.
do that, you just have to take it down first.
Said you do.
I know, but it's correct. It's correct. So stop making fun of me because it's correct. If you decide to put your stuff on a fanfiction platform or on Wattpad or any of those other free sites, keep in mind, if you decide to publish it, you're going to have to take it down first because they want first publication rights.
Yes,
And
that's
so as a result of that, you will need to take it down first. Will they maybe still not publish you even then? Potentially. But more than likely, if you take it down, they won't have a problem. The issue is just that they're like, hey, I can't make money off of this if you have it on a free platform, which is true. But also not necessarily true. A lot of people love free stuff and then are like, ooh, because I got the first book for free, now I'm going to buy the whole rest of the series. But that's a marketing tactic, and they want to decide to do that instead of just having you decide for them. Publishers like to be controlling. That's a whole different kettle of fish. All right. So, also, speaking of which, if you are doing an incredibly diverse cast, make sure that you find a publisher who loves doing diversity, because not only will you increase your chances of getting published, but also you will run into a lot more less resistance with cultural things. You're gonna have a lot more people be like, okay, let's give this a shot and help them polish up their cultural depiction of this person instead of just being like, oh, they didn't portray them right, garbage. They're going to be a lot more willing to help you and work with it because they want the diversity rather than just being like, I don't really like the story and their cultural thing was just okay, so I'm going to chuck it. So definitely look for those kinds of opportunities. Look for publishers that is what they advertise, that they want people who have this kind of story. There are even agents out there that specifically say, I only want stories with Latin main characters or different things like that.
Oh,
Find them. Make sure you seek those kind of people out. Yes.
This is kind of like manga magazines.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
there are shonen magazines, which is mainly mangas about like fighting and stuff.
Exactly.
And then there's also like shoujo, which is like magical girl anime
Yeah.
stuff.
There are categories.
And so they get their stories published in whichever genre they are.
Mhm.
So like if it's a shonen, they'll get published in the shonen magazine.
Yeah.
And if it's a shoujo, they'll get published in the shoujo
Exactly.
magazine.
So make sure that whoever you're publishing to is pro diversity and pro whatever your other stuff is. If it's fantasy, if it's murder mystery, whatever it is, make sure you check as many of those boxes as you can when you are submitting. All right. I think that's it as far as questions. It didn't seem like the rest of you guys had any questions, so I'm going to turn the video off. The next writing contest is the first chapter contest. That has no prompt aside from write a first chapter within our parameters.
Yay.
So as a result, you can do any genre you want. Keep in mind, I did talk about first chapters a little while ago, so if you want to go back and rewatch that video on YouTube, please do. I gave a lot of tips there, and I also did another first chapter one a couple years ago as well. So if you want to just binge my first chapter videos, that's a great idea. There's also a lot of other good content online done by other YouTubers that talk about first chapters and things like that. So if you want to polish up on that, please do. Remember, the word limit is 3,000 words. That's my main big thing. Yes, everything else I need you to follow, please, but at the same time, that's the biggest one because we might die if we have it be super, super long. We get a lot of entries, and I don't want to pass out trying to read them all. All right, I'm going to turn off the video now. If you have any other questions or want to work with me on something else, please let me know. But if you also just want to like put your headphones in, lock in, and write, go for it.